Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's Robert Phoenix. Apparently, I'm streaming live on YouTube now, so welcome to the show. This is 15 Minutes of Flame. Let me make sure that I have my preferences all set up so that you can get the best of me. The built-in microphone, yes, let's have a little increase in the level and the volume so I can broadcast and enunciate with clarity and authority what's happening out there. The 12th of December, and we are in the zone of the cold moon. Cold moon. Let's see if we've got some peepage happening in the chat room here. What's going on? As of now, I have nobody. Let's see, what else? 2 people watching now. Very interesting. Very interesting. I'm just going to talk until you guys show up. It's me and somebody else. I may as well like my own show. Very unusual. Usually people come in and chat and we're ready to go, and there is nothing happening today. There are 3 people watching now. How about that? Interesting. Let's see. We do a little refresher here. There's 8 people watching now. There we go. There's Mary. There's Megan. All right. The forces are assembling. Let me just right screen angle. Got my buds in. Today I'm drinking bulletproof coffee. This is the original bulletproof coffee. I'm lazy this morning. Must be the cold moon. So what's happening out there? I did a show with Clyde Lewis last night from 10 o'clock Central Standard Time to midnight. And I always enjoy being on with Clyde. Clyde has this really interesting vibe. He has this quality of almost being like an end times preacher. And he has the ability to communicate a level of doom that is oddly inspiring in some ways. And I think it has something to do with the fact that he has this background of being raised in the Pentecostal church and was raised on the rapture. And he's also a Pisces, so I think he has the ability to contain a lot of emotion. You know, when I think of Pisces, the water signs are emotional containers. That's what the water signs are. And being that he's a Pisces, he has the potential for vast emotional containment, because that's how Pisces tends to operate as a sign. So when he gets into something, I think he has the ability to go quite deep. And last night was a good show. I mean, we got into this whole thing around this cold moon, which took place, the full moon at 12:12 Eastern Standard Time, and 12:12 the day 12:12. So there's a lot of interesting symbolism around the number 12, and I brought up the hanged man, which is the 12th card of the major arcana, and we talked quite a bit about that, and I felt like it was a really relevant topic of conversation in terms of sort of where we are both politically and socially and spiritually in a lot of ways. And when I brought this topic of the cold moon up last night on the Facebook page, there were people who were sharing stories about how they had friends who were, losing their jobs, and there was a lot of very intense energy that was being communicated last night. And it's does the moon have something to do with this in terms of its kind of cyclic manifestation? Well, perhaps. This is the last full moon of this decade, and that's kind of something that's wrap your head around that. It's the last full moon of this decade. And again, in terms of astrology, the moon is also another aspect of this emotional container. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense on that level. I mean, even on a kind of a weird esoteric level, that, you know, because there are people that firmly believe that the moon is not really what we think it is. And I'm kind of in that camp too, but that does not lessen its astrological import in my estimation. Because there are people that believe that the moon is this object that was essentially moved here and that it's artificial and does things that it shouldn't really be doing, right? So that said, I also feel like it's this emotion, it contains emotional memory, just like the various water signs are emotional containers. The moon, which is the ruler of Cancer, performs the same function, and it performs the same function on an archetypal level or a mythopoetic level, but it also could also perform this function from an almost technological perspective, because if the moon is this artificial body, who's to say that it isn't in this position where it's essentially soaking up our historical and emotional memory? Who's to say that that's not the case? I know it's lunacy, but it's something I've been thinking about. And as a result of this, when we reach the end of a cycle, like the end of a 10-year cycle, which is where we are, that it's reached this level of containment for the last 10 years. And when we get into this next decade, which is where we're headed, I've been talking a lot about this idea of a reset. Well, there is that potential for this idea of the reset, like the last 10 years are over, it's done. It's an epoch, a period of time. And one could make a case that 2018 would have been the end of that, since it would have been the 9th year of the decade and the 10th year of the decade. There's something new coming. But for the sake of just the argument of a new decade or a new 10-year cycle, so what we're dealing with is this idea that the moon has this potential of releasing the last 10 years. But think about that for a moment. What's going on in the last 10 years in the world? How fast has the last 10 years just absolutely ripped by? You know, just completely ripped by. I remember in 2010, that's when Jasper came into my life. That's right, Jasper came into my life in 2010. He was a wee lad with his little sister, not really blood sister, they've got a weird thing going on. They're kind of sister lover, brother sister mean thing, right, Jasper? It was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were 2 years into the Obama administration and still trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. Who is this guy and where is this all going? And some of us had an idea and understanding of where it was all going, but there were 6 more years left of where that thing was going. And I believe we were just headed into the early phases of Obamacare at that time, which was just going to pass regardless. The people weren't going to read it. It was like, oh, we're just going to, and we'll deal with it later. Right? This is what the Democratic House was more than willing to rubber stamp during that time. So that was 10 years ago, and it feels to me like we're at this point now where the last 10 years are going to be released, and it won't be during this full moon. The cold moon is reflective, right? When we get into the full moon, it's a reflective energy. It's like this light that's illuminating and shining back to us. No, we're talking about really the new moon. Right? We're talking about the dark moon. And when is that going to take place? It's going to take place on the eclipse, on the solar eclipse, which is going to be happening on the 26th of December. And that's when the last 10 years is released, because now we're at a culmination phase. And if you want to use this as an exercise, for the next 48 hours, pay attention to the news and pay attention to some of the stories that'll be coming out through the news. And you're going to see this compendium of stories and threads that aren't just located in 2019. So one of the things that I was looking at in terms of headlines this morning was Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein is back in court, and he looks like shit. Not that he looked like anything great before, but he looks terrible now. He looks really bad. He's lost, whatever hair he had, he's lost most of it. He went to his hearing yesterday in a walker, which is, Harvey's a Pisces. There's more Piscean kinds of imagery. Because also, too, when we get to the end of the decade, it has a very Piscean-like feel to it, since Pisces is the last sign, right? It's the last sign. It's the last house, which is kind of interesting because it's ruled by Neptune, but Neptune's not the last planet. Theoretically, it would be Scorpio if you still believe Pluto's a planet, which I do, by the way. I do. So, but he's the last degree of Pisces as well. He's not just Pisces, he's the final degree. So he shows up yesterday in this walker looking extremely pathetic. And he just settled his civil case for $42 million. It's a lot of scratch. His bail is $2 million, the $2 million insurance bond. And apparently there was some issues around he's got an ankle bracelet. So Harvey Weinstein he's confined essentially to the state of New York and the state of Connecticut, which I did not know. His passport was revoked, which I do believe I recollect now. But he was also admonished by the judge because he was fucking with his ankle bracelet and trying to go places and do things that he could not be monitored by. But again, that's one of those threads that's, sort of moving backwards in time. There's a lot of information in another series of threads that's leading back to Pizzagate. There's a really big story that's popping around Disney's involvement and Cartoon Network's involvement around Pizzagate. There's also another story breaking about the lies and disinformation of the Afghan war and the war in Syria, which is really big. That stuff is starting to come out as well. And those are events that took place over the last 10 years. I mean, the war in Syria, I believe, started, 2009? Went on for a very long time, and our involvement there was very deep on a number of different levels. But what's coming up now is the fact that, of course, the American people were lied to, not only about the reason for our involvement in both of those wars, but also the casualties involved and how many people have actually really suffered, how many people have actually really died. And that's starting to come out now. So you see these threads, they're starting, it's not quite like a Mercury retrograde, but we've reached this level of full containment with this last full moon of the decade, this cold moon. And that's just from a historical or the memory perspective. So continue to watch the news and watch these threads that are kind of moving from the past into the present. And it would be nice if we tied all of them up now, wouldn't it? What would the world be like if everything got tied up? Because everything isn't tied up at all. Which is one of the reasons why the world is in such a sad state of affairs in a lot of ways. Like, what would happen if all of a sudden, I mean, think about this. What would happen if all of a sudden the JFK stuff got very real and people were able to have all the information at hand and say, okay, this person did this, and this person did this, and this government was involved in this. And what would happen if the same thing happened with 9/11? I mean, what would happen if all this stuff was just able to be like right there? If we were able to resolve it all, you know, how would that change our reality? Would it change our reality? I believe it would. I believe it would. And I think it would change our reality in a way that we can't even begin to comprehend. But am I predicting that's the case? The answer to that would be no. But that's not to say that we're not going to be able to see this stuff as it moves forward in time, since we've reached this culmination and this fulfillment of the emotional containment and historical containment for the last 10 years. We're here now. It's in the sign of Gemini, which is an interesting sign. As you all know, I have a fondness in my heart for the twins. And I really do. I really do. A lot of people think I hate Geminis. I don't hate Geminis at all. I think Geminis are very interesting people. I think they're some of the most interesting people in the zodiac. In fact, maybe I even have Gemini envy. I never really thought about that, but that's quite possible. No, I don't really have Gemini envy, but they're very, very bright people, and they're always able to turn on a dime and take a different position, even though they don't even really believe in that position, right? But this moon is in Gemini now, and there's this very unusual kind of objectification with this moon, because it's a bifurcated moon. And there's one side of the moon that represents, or at least one side of the sign that represents a particular reality, and another side of the sign represents a different reality. And that's one of the things that I was talking about with Clyde last night too, is that I think we're really going to see, again, over the course of the next 48 hours, maybe through into the weekend, that we're going to see more of this bifurcation, more of this bicameralization of consciousness. And there are some people are going to be just fine. And there are other people going to lose their shit. I said shit last time in Clyde's show, which that show's broadcast on AM radio. And I don't know if there's a delay, but I try to be conscious of it. But I think that's what we're also going to see as well. So what they call the widening, what Yeats calls the widening gyre, in the second coming. I feel like, the widening gyre is going to continue and be accentuated during this full moon. So we're in that process, and we're in that phase now. And while the moon won't be as full as it was at 12/12 or 12/12 last night, it'll still be incredibly bright and very luminous tonight. So you may want to go out and check it out and see how you feel. A lot of people had a very hard time sleeping last night. Is that surprising? I didn't. I have now been blessed and bequeathed with a new sleep potential in my life. I'm so happy about that, because for years I had issues with sleeping, and now it's like, hit the covers. I got my sleep thing down. I figured out now how I can sleep easier. It's not that hard. It was just an application of 2 layers of covers, so it's working great. And a little melatonin. But I did not take any melatonin last night because I got off the show late with Clyde. And if I popped the melatonin at midnight, I wouldn't even be on right now. Maybe I'd be on. Maybe I'd just be coming on now. Whenever I take melatonin, I'm down for 8.5 to 9 hours. So that's not the case. Speaking of Greta, we talked about this yesterday. She was named Person of the Year. And her proclamation that we have 12 years left. And this is something that came up on Clyde's show last night. Clyde brought it up, that we have 12 years left. That this is her, she's become the Joan of Arc of her generation and our time. The prophetess, the prophetess of Asperger's. And so I looked at Greta's chart again to see what's going on. What's quite interesting is that the day that she was named the Person of the Year, by time, of course, is the day of this full moon in Gemini at 12/12, and I looked at where her Saturn is in her chart. Her Saturn's in the sign of Gemini, and it is at 24 degrees, which is conjunct this Gemini moon that we're currently talking about today. So This should be a very interesting day for Greta. Of course, Trump wasted no time in trolling Greta. They've got this Twitter war now going on. Trump and Greta. What weird times we're living in, man. This is crazy, bizarre, highly entertaining. I find the whole thing very entertaining. But the other thing, too, about Greta's Saturn is that it's at 24 degrees, Gemini, which if you slice it in two, it's 212s, right? So it's a fascinating numerological and symbolic sync between her karmic yoke in a lot of ways. And what we often talk about Leo as a sign that represents childhood, Gemini is a sign that in some ways represents the eternal youth or the pueriternus. It's always spring in Gemini because it takes place in the month of June. It's not quite summer, right? When we hit summer, we're at the end of June, which is the summer solstice in the beginning of the sign of Cancer. So Gemini is kind of located in this perpetual spring. And there is this eternally youthful quality that's associated with Gemini. So Gemini has its roots in childhood. It represents the third house astrologically, and that's when as you go around the wheel, that's when you start to go to school, right? So again, Astrology 101, when you're born into your body, you take your first breath, you hit the ascendant, and you are just there, right? You're there. You're there until roughly the age of 2, right? The age of 2. And then after that, you move into the second house. And in the second house, you're dealing with things like Taurus and, bodily movements and bodily functions and, becoming more ambulatory and all those, you're on Earth and you have that kind of Earth experience. And then eventually you move into the third house, which is Gemini, right around the age of 5, 6. And guess what? You're going to school, right? That's what happens. That's what Gemini represents in the third house. You're going to school, unless you're homeschooled, which is, a whole different kind of path in a lot of ways. But when that occurs and you go to school, for most of us now, okay, not the current generation because, they're wiring school differently. But when we went to school, it was all about, good and bad, right or wrong, pass or fail, boys in this line, girls in this line, all that shit, right? I mean, that's how it worked. It was very Gemini-esque. So Gemini does represent our childhood. And when we move into becoming conscious and aware of our mental acuity, mental faculties, we learn things. So Gemini is rooted in childhood. And we have her, who is Saturn in Gemini. Now think about this now. With her Saturn in Gemini, there's a heaviness and a gravity that's associated with her childhood. It's very much so. So when, what we're seeing with her in terms of her blaming the rest of the world for the fact that her childhood has been stolen, and not just her childhood, but her future. And she's supposed to take on the mantle of being the most adult in the room because of her prophetic abilities in some ways. It makes total sense with her Saturn and Capricorn, Saturn and Gemini. But it's not just because she has it, it doesn't make it true. Okay, it does not make it true. So Trump, who's also a Gemini, and whose sun sign is conjunct Greta Saturn. How about that? And now they're in this odd Twitter war. And he was basically telling me to go watch a movie and go back to school and be a kid again. And leave the adulting to the adults. Now, what's also very interesting is that last night when I was talking, I'm doing a bit of a synopsis to try to get you up to speed, but last night when I was on Clyde's show, I went back to the year 1212. Now, I'm a time traveler. It's what I do. So I went back to 1212 because it was 1212 and 1212. But guess what happened in 1212? It was the Children's Crusade. Stephen of Cloyes, the young boy who was hanging out in the field, the shepherd boy who had the mysterious encounter with the hooded man. He's the hooded man. Let's see if we can pull this off. The mysterious encounter. Stephen, you must find the will and spirit of God in your heart and lead a regiment of children back to the Holy Land to reclaim Christendom for Christ. You know, he had that, you know, that's what happened. He was in the fields. And he was supposedly not a very bright shepherd boy at that. Kind of, you know, he wasn't a village idiot, but he also wasn't challenging town intellectuals. So he has this encounter, comes back and tells his parents. And his parents, you know, most parents would say, you got to be fucking nuts. Really? That happened? You really should think about this. You really should maybe sleep on this, Stephen. Because you are just 12 years old, which is true. He was 12 years old, so he was maybe 12. But instead they're like, oh my God, this is great. You know, you had a conversation with the prophet and God has moved you, and you know, go find a bunch of other 12-year-old kids and go off to the Holy Land, go get slaughtered, right? I mean, so this is what they did. And he did this. You know, he had this vision. Apparently, he was very charismatic at being able to communicate the fact that they needed to go to Jerusalem and reclaim Jerusalem for Christ. This is the Children's Crusade. Now it's happening in 1212. And we were talking about Greta, and it was 1212, 1212. And I'm like, holy smokes. And there was nobody that was theoretically a part of it. Now, I don't know how they did this. I don't know if they were checking IDs at the door, but apparently nobody over the age of 12 was a part of Stephen's disastrous crusade. Now, Jay and I talked about this on our show that we did about Tartaria. And by the way, John Levy has a new video out on the mud flood. Quite interesting. And we talked about this, and we talked about how they may have never made it to the Holy Land, which is an interesting thing to think about. They didn't. They didn't make it to the Holy Land. But then what happened is that they got as far as, so a lot of them starved, but they got as far as Rome. And there's this theory that they were snatched up and taken into, into the care of the Catholic Church. We all know how well that has gone throughout history. And there were 3 crusades, and one was led by this Stephen of Cloyes, and the other was a Germanic crusade, and then the third was, I forget who led the third one. But in each case, they were highly unsuccessful. But the numbers of the children were significant, and may have actually also been associated with this idea around orphans, which is, for all intents and purposes, what they were. Anyway, there's a lot happening now. Trump also, no audio. And this. Can you see audio? Yeah, I see audio. I have a level. It's right there. And so Trump's team, I think I have the, let me see if I can find this. Yeah, you got to see this. This is the latest on Trump. Check this out. This is Trump's team released video of him as Thanos, the villain who commits genocide in the Avengers movies, and people are puzzled. Here we go. Here's Trump with yet another archetype that he's taken on. And so this is the Infinity Glove. And the Infinity Glove apparently has to do with the reset. because that's what Thanos is. He is the demiurge of the reset. Is this what Trump's team is portraying him as? The demiurge of the reset? What's interesting is that apparently in the movie, half of the population is evacuated, eradicated, right? Half the world is gone. And this is also very much in alignment with the sign of Gemini, because Gemini represents equal parts, half and half. 50 of 100, 25 of 50, whatever that half is. And when you look at how the branches of government have been set up, to a large extent, it's very Gemini-esque, the bicameralization of government. You have the House and you have the Senate, and the two kind of work in this interesting synchrony, right? So again, that's very Gemini-esque. And is Trump is that indicative of Trump wiping out, one half of our branch of government in that configuration? Of course, the president and then the Supreme Court represent the four pillars, right? With the media being the fifth estate. So this is a very interesting meme that Trump's people, this is Trump's people now. They've put this out. Trump is Thanos, the destroyer of worlds, the Lord of the reset. And it feels like that's kind of where we are right now. I didn't talk about this with Clyde last night, but what he was referring to was this energy of the reset, or this potential for this 12-year cycle to come to an end, and then something new comes into play. We did talk about I talked about the fourth turning, and I brought that up, that how we are in the winter of America, and we are in a lot of ways in the winter of the planet, both figuratively and literally. I mean, this is a very this is a time of culmination. And it's not the culmination of the 80s, where it was the fruits of capitalism in the West and democracy, essentially becoming victorious over the East in the fall of the Soviet Union. That was the denouement, the apotheosis of that cycle. And then we've been steadily moving downwards from that point in linear time. In a lot of ways, we have been. But this is the precursor to what comes next. And what comes next is the spring phase, and we will have a spring. But I tell you right now, we're not in any spring. This is not any spring. We talked about the hangman, and the hangman as a metaphor for our time, because there's really nothing in a lot of ways that we can do about where we are. A lot of people will say, well, Robert, what can we do? There's not a lot you can do at this point in time. I mean, you can speak truth to power, which I think is always a very important function and role that we are tasked with. At least some of us are tasked with that. We can do that, and we can live our lives in accordance with the highest and best spiritual ideals that we can muster. And I think that's a really important thing to do during these times. I really feel like if you're going to commit to something, that's something you should commit to. And that's what you can do. Everything else, you're in the hangman position. Now, the hangman position is, in an odd way, it's a very liberating one, because it is through the suspension and the inversion of one's consciousness. And remember, we're living in the inverted universe as well. So what better way to experience the inverted universe than through the archetype of the hangman? Because you're hanging upside down. You're like a bat suspended from your feet. And so if we are living in the upside down, if we are living in an inverted universe, which I believe we are, then being in the hangman position allows you to see things more clearly. If you were right side up, you'd be dyslexic in some ways. You'd be dyslexic with reality. But being that we're in a kind of this hangman cycle, you can actually, oh, okay, I can see the world now. So that's a really important aspect to wrap your head around. Don't try, in a lot of ways, to kind of flip your position. Be okay with being suspended. Be okay with being able to not feel like there's much you can do on a material level in order to affect some kind of change. I mean, I even saw that with the fluoride stuff here. I had to let go. And the more you struggle, the kind of the harder, the tighter the cords around the ankles got in a lot of ways. Now, there's an important theme associated with the hangman that reaches into the Marvel universe, and that has to do with Thor and Odin and the Ragnarok, right, which is the creation. Also kind of connected to the Edda, the creation tale of the Norse universe. And part of that story, and a very big part of that story, has to do with Odin, who is the Yahweh figure in the Norse creation story. And so Odin is hung upside down. He is suspended from his feet from the Yggdrasil tree. And he can't do anything. He cannot help his people. He can't save his people. He can't even save himself. So what does Odin do? Well, Odin surrenders and he lets go. And this is a theme from that is popular in a number of different tales or stories where avatars kind of reach this cross or this kind of fork in the road with their experience. Buddha sat under the tree. He wasn't hung under the tree, but he sat under the tree. And he was besieged by demons before he attained his enlightenment. And of course, there's the story of Sananda, who is also on the cross. And he has this hangman moment, but we envision him as being connected to the. And I'm wondering if that's even true now. I mean, not the crucifixion itself, but we like to think of that he's in this cross that's right side up. But when we look at the inverted cross or the satanic cross, it is upside down. And that would also be indicative or symbolic of the suspension of Christ, right, in that configuration. It's something to think about. Why not? We're in the hangman phase, theoretically. But getting back to Odin, what happens is he surrenders. And just like theoretically Sananda surrenders, and he's able to ascend and then rise into heaven to be one with his father. With Odin, he's able to gain the gift of prophecy, because that's when the runes are introduced into this idea that we can have tools in order to look into the future and begin to divine the events of our time. So this is a very important aspect of the hangman position for Odin, because he attains the gift of prophecy. And if we can move it forward and bring it into the context of the here and now, and you're able to be okay with where you are, whatever that is. And that's not an easy thing to do, by the way, especially during a time when theoretically we have this emotional containment for the last 10 years, which is being unspooled. And to be able to see that and be a part of that and witness that and be okay with that and surrender. But the idea here with that is that once you're able to do that, then you're able to then have another reality that becomes apparent to you that you could not see before. So I guess the story or the lesson of today's 15 Minutes of Flame is that if you're struggling, let go of your struggle. Let go. Let it go. You're in a state of suspension. And be okay with being upside down. And see what blessings and what gifts emerge from being able to see the world as it is. And it's actually, again, if you look at this idea that we're living in an inverted universe and this is the hangman time, you can begin to see the world as it is, right? Versus being flipped around and trying to make sense of this upside down. All right, let me check in with you guys. Let's see what is happening in your world. With you, Peter is hanged upside down on the rock. There we go. There we go. All right, what else? Let's see. Camera obscura. Good point about the upside down perspective, Robert. Well-known art technique for producing an image is to turn it upside down, then draw from that image. You get a much more accurate drawing. Interesting. Hangman position is also the meditation pose for lucid dreaming. There will be a paratrooper which enters your window in full battle gear if you should flush with the seat up from now on. Oh, that's funny, Charlie. What else do we have? You're most welcome. Isn't the hangman enlightenment? Respond properly. Love everybody. Do the best you can. Hangman view this world upside down. Hey, Chris, nice to see you. Perspective created by being manipulated. Objection, Your Honor. I demand the right to do as I please in my own toilet seat. There's a lot of toilet humor going on. Thanatos is the Greek god of death. That is true. That is true. What else do we have here? Greta will self-immolate in 2020. Woo. A few days in psych ward grants perspective. That is so true. Let's see. I've got some info on fluoride. We'll say, oh, get some fluoride. Hangman sees a different view. Very much. Very much. People still watch TV. Incredible. I know, right? It's true. I'm on the last days of Sony PlayStation View, which is what I use to stream TV. It's a really interesting thing. You know, Sony created this streaming service, and they're ending it on the 30th of January. It's like, wow, really? You create a whole business model, and you employ people and infrastructure, and that's just ending. Like, that's kind of a big deal. It's kind of like NBC saying, well, you know, we're going to end NBC now. We'll still have MSNBC, but we're going to end NBC now. Right? Or maybe they're going to end MSNBC and still be NBC. Sony just wants to be involved with games. So I've been thinking about, well, what's going to happen when my subscription to PlayStation View runs out on the 30th of January? And I'm thinking, I may not even go. Because I had Sling for a long time. And then they started to drop some of my favorite programming, which isn't much. So I went from Sling to PlayStation View, which I've actually kind of enjoyed because of their DVR. But when it's over, I think it's over. I don't think I'm going to go back to Sling. I am done. I think I'm finished with that. And so for me, it'll be YouTube and Amazon Prime because I have it. And it's okay. It's an okay service. And there's this quirky little channel called Pluto. If you haven't found Pluto, you should find Pluto. You can watch it on your computer. And it has all these weird channels and very strange programming in a lot of ways. And Pluto has commercials. But what's interesting about Pluto is that, like, I watched The Longest Yard on Pluto the other night, and they didn't edit it. It was it full, right? And then they would go to commercial breaks. And with Pluto, you only get 2 or 3 commercials. It's not like you're getting hammered with 10 commercials. So they're there. And a lot of the commercials tend to be fairly innocuous in a lot of ways. So if you're looking for a free streaming option that offers some kind of interesting programming with some news stations, news networks, like you can get RT on Pluto and stuff like that, you should check it out. It's totally free. And I'm not pushing them for any other reason except for alternative media experience. Let me give you another version of this upside down and strangely inverted world we're living in. I didn't report on this, but there was a big event in New Jersey. I believe it was Passaic, where there was a big gunfight. It wasn't really a gunfight. It was these two individuals who went to a Jewish deli and started shooting the place up. And it apparently got very heavy. I don't live in New Jersey, but some of you who do, probably got, close to firsthand accounts about this thing. And what's interesting about this is that it was very quickly labeled an anti-Semitic crime, an anti-Semitic hate crime, because it took place inside of a Jewish deli. And initially, the reports were that these were white nationalists, that these were hateful anti-Semites who were connected in some ways to white nationalism. And that was the first burst of data that was associated with this event. And then within the next 48 hours, it was proven that the two people that were involved were indeed not so-called white nationalists. And in fact, one of them was connected to the Black Hebrew Nation. Remember, this is the group that was heckling Nick Sandman and the Native American guy. They were there that day, and they're virulently anti-Israel, anti-Jew, anti-white. These guys are they're street front preachers of theoretical hate. And they're all over the place, and nothing ever really happens to them. Well, one of these guys apparently decided that there was enough talk. So he went in with his girlfriend and decided to do a shoot 'em up. But again, in the upside down world or the inverted universe, that's not what was reported. What was reported was, this is a great crisis. We all know who theoretically hates these people. And so that was the original narrative, but that's not true. Now, consequently, Trump has passed a bill that has to do with anti-Semitism and another level of hate crime. And here's where I think this is going. This is where I think this is going. I think that they're going to get to a place, or try to get to a place, where any kind of open debate or discussion or questioning or challenging of any quote-unquote official narrative around Israel, the power of Israel, the power of AIPAC, the influential power that is embedded in the system. I think that they're going to try to push that this could be punishable by death. That's my sense. That's my sense. That the stakes will be so high that this abrogation of the First Amendment, which allows us theoretically to talk about anybody and anything, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's quote unquote anti-Semitic or racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever those labels are. The First Amendment says we have the right to be able to talk about these things and discuss these things. Now, the way our culture has been created is that if you do talk about these things, there is an inherent risk involved. So there's a price to pay. Like, freedom of speech is not free. It's not. So you have to be very conscious and aware about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and what the true intent is. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's a process of refinement which allows people to be in touch with truth. Because if you're in touch with truth and you go through a process of refinement, then that's what you get. And it's not hateful and it's not personal. It is what it is. It's an expression of truth. It is being threaded through the eye of the needle. So, however, that said, what's taking place is that through the acceleration, the accumulation of these events, there's a case being made, and that case says, we're going to make things so painful, so punishable, that you won't even begin to approach being able to, quote unquote, speak freely. Because if you do, the circumstances and the ramifications could be fatal. So the Trump administration, and again, I have to flip this back now. They have essentially pushed for, and they got pushed back on, by the way. They have pushed for the federal government. This is the federal government now, to be able to exterminate people, right? That based on certain crimes, that they could make a case that this person should be killed. And Barr's been pushing for this for a while now. I first heard about it during the summer, but they've run into some roadblocks apparently around the higher courts that they can't do this, which I think is probably a good thing. That's a lot of power to be accumulated by one body. It says, okay, well, we can essentially do death payments now. So they've been stopped momentarily. And I'm not saying that this is the case, that the two are related, but you have to be able to look at it from that perspective. Now, again, this has to do with free speech and termination. Terminus. YouTube now apparently is working with this idea that if you criticize somebody else, that they can take your account away. I mean, think about that. If you criticize somebody else, so let's say you criticize a group, or let's say you criticize an institution, you could have your account suspended. I mean, that's another form of terminus, right? So again, we're living in this really strange and unusual time where the stakes keep getting raised around this idea of being able to speak freely, right? And it has all kinds of different manifestations. I was looking at something that Eric Holder, right now, Eric Holder, and there are people who are inside of the Democratic, inside of a certain wing of the Democratic Party who want Bill Barr removed. Like they're going after Barr now. They want to bar Barr. And they think that by doing that, they can stop this investigation with Durham that could be moving forward and really focusing on their bullshit. So it's fascinating to watch that it's not just kind of one conflagration, but there are a number of these conflagrations that are taking place all simultaneously. What are you going to do about it? Sit back, stretch your arms out, buy yourself an inversion table, and lay backwards and sit back and surrender. Surrender to the process so you can have deeper spiritual insight into where this is and where you are. The hangman is the meditation of the day, 12:12. With that, I urge you to hang in there. Hang in there. There will be a better day, and there will be a better time. There will be another spring. Hope springs eternal. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Make sure you get plenty of rest and fluids. Eat the right foods. Stay healthy. Feed yourself spiritually. Be inspired. There are stories of people who go through great duress in their lives and are able to overcome it. find these stories, find these tales of inspiration. They're important. Find your own tale of inspiration, overcome the duress of your own life. And we all have various amounts of duress, some more than others, all of which can be overcome and transcended. That's what it is. All right, let me check in with you guys one more time. Will YouTube self-immolate in 2022? Thanks. What they hear in their head is different than what is intended, much less the actual words. Robert is exactly right on this free speech issue. Cash, carry cash. Global extinction religion is Tibetan Buddhism. 2.0, burning by her own hand in protest is a logical end for her. Let's see, remember that you better than that. Let's see what else we have here. Ginsburg kicks the bucket. I think she's gone. I don't know who she is at this point. Like it or not, Trump is crushing certain forms of free speech. It's an interesting thing with Trump, right? He's the Gemini on steroids. Because he is essentially demolishing the media, right? I mean, we're seeing fake news and all this other stuff, and he's really brought a laser cannon to that. And at the same time, there's always this reaction that takes place. So the reaction to people, speaking is that other people don't like to hear what's being said, and of course they want to be able to limit that. So there was always this kind of sense of containment for a while, right? That the media knew that it was fake, and it was like running all these narratives that were complete lies, and yet there was kind of more free speech too at the same time in a weird way, right? Because people were saying things 15 years ago that they could not say now. There's no way people get away with some of the stuff I said 15 years ago. And even the content, the media, and the films just couldn't be produced now. So yeah, I think to your point, Uncle Glenn, there's this very interesting kind of effect where something gets exposed and illuminated and scorched, and at the same time, there's this other reaction to that takes place. So yeah, I think you're right about that. Let's see what else. Anything else we have here? Free speech was a fleeting epoch. Charles, I read my Bible. Social credit system coming in. It's already here. Social credit system is already here. What do people do when they go to apply for a job? They eliminate their Facebook pages. They delete their Twitter accounts. If they don't, they're not playing with a full deck, because what do employers do now? In most cases, when you get to a hireable stage, an employer is going to go online. It's going to go, oh, what does this person tweet about? Let me go to their Facebook page. Let me see what's going on here. And they'll pay people. They'll pay people to do searches. So the social credit system is already here. It's already in fact, even if it's not enforced. There's people who are aware of their online persona, and it possibly being in conflict with their employable persona. Well, they eradicate that pretty quickly. And if they don't, they're not playing with a full deck. Because why would you? Why, if you have a lot of potentially sketchy material and you're applying for a job, unless you're applying for a job that allows you to be sketchy on, in their perception of being sketchy, then you leave your stuff up. But most people are involved in the act of self-preservation, and so they will scrub it, by their own accord and at their own hand. So that gets into the realm of self-censorship and self-censoring. So we already have the social credit system. It's already in place. It's just not being enforced. People are enforcing it themselves. All right, what else do we have here in chat? Yes, your social corporate credit. Obvious states, oh yes. Plus inclined bed therapy. Lately, numeric's amazing. Okay, I guess that's a Bible. By the way, my chiropractor using version table has advised me. Maybe I'll do my show on Monday on an inversion table. Maybe I'll do the hangman show on Monday. I can only do for probably about 3 minutes because I do have an inversion table. Tomorrow on the Friday Firecast, I'll be joined by Tessa Dick, who is the widow of Philip K. Dick. I've had Tessa on the show before, back when I was over on Blog Talk Radio. She has her own streaming channel. Philip K. Dick's birthday, I believe, is on Monday. So we're going to talk about Phil, look at his life, look at Tessa's work as well. In some ways, she's kind of carrying on what Phil was doing with his life and his work. So that'll be at 12 noon Central Standard Time tomorrow. And looking forward to that. And if you have any interest in Philip K. Dick, this idea of time and some of the ideas that he talks about in terms of these alternate realities, one of which seems to be bleeding into this one, well, you're going to want to watch it. In the meantime, use your head to discern what's real and your heart to stay open to what's possible. Stay open to your heart. That's, I think, a big thing. This is a lesson I'm really doing my best to learn, because I get real heady, and I'm doing my best to stay open to my heart. That's being kind and compassionate and patient with other people, and making sure that I'm doing my best not to contribute to the kind of brutality that is permeating this globosphere. And of course, we're always tested on this stuff too. But it's like, if we can keep a spot in our hearts open for other people in a way that is, at the very least, compassionate and conscious, then we're able to be kind of the keepers of the flame, the keepers of light and love. And this is something that's important. And it is cumulative, by the way, too. So don't think doing this is in vain. You can, use your candle and light the heart of another, even though they may not always see it at that time. All right, I'm out of here. I'll see you tomorrow, 12 noon, Central Standard Time. Robert Phoenix, part of 15 Minutes of Flame. Take care.